The Beast of Trinity Texas was released on November 19th, 2025 and produced by Big Feet Films. The film follows Sheriff Titus Ridge, played by Terry Reeves, who also wrote and directed the movie, as he investigates a series of brutal killings in the small town of Trinity, Texas. What initially looks like an animal attack quickly spirals into something far stranger and far more bizarre than ever can be imagined. Ridge is a war veteran struggling with PTSD and alcoholism, and as the town begins to unravel around him, he's forced to juggle multiple problems at once. There's rising tension between local veterans protesting the removal of a memorial bridge and the construction of a high-speed railroad project, political pressure coming from the town's mayor, and a growing sense that something in the nearby woods isn't exactly natural. Helping him in the investigation is Deputy Miles Devereaux, a former professional baseball player trying to balance his demanding job with his family life. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office is dealing with strange calls from a cryptozoology organization that believes the killings might be linked to something legendary. Things become even more complicated when the cryptozoologist who shows up to investigate turns out to be someone very close to the sheriff, his estranged daughter. Her arrival not only brings new theories about what might be responsible for the attacks, but also forces the sheriff to confront unresolved personal issues from his past. As more deaths occur and the mystery deepens, the investigation begins to reveal that the situation in Trinity might involve far more than just a rogue animal in the woods. Secrets tied to money, politics, and powerful interests start to surface, leaving the sheriff and his small team trying to figure out who or what is really behind the chaos in the town. Without getting into spoiler territory, the film mixes elements of small-town crime drama, cryptid horror, and conspiracy thriller, gradually building toward a much bigger mystery than the characters initially expected. Now, let's get into some of the characters and how some of them work, while others, well, not so much. The main character is Sheriff Titus Ridge, an ex-war veteran turned sheriff who's dealing with alcoholism and PTSD from both his time in the military and his years as a cop. This is definitely a character archetype we've seen before, especially in a lot of 80s and 90s action films. Think movies like Lethal Weapon or Die Hard. The worn-down lawman with personal demons is a pretty familiar trope. Now, maybe it's not as common in Bigfoot movies specifically. I'd have to dig through my mental archive of Sasquatch films to know for sure, but even if it isn't new, I still think the character works well enough here. For what the story needs, at least, Titus functions just as fine as the lead, and I didn't have any major issues following him through the film. When it comes to secondary characters like Deputy Miles or Autumn, they at least try to give them some personal depth. Each of them has their own little subplot that attempts to make them feel like real people rather than just background NPCs, which a lot of movies unfortunately fall into doing. Miles struggles with missing time with his family, especially his son's baseball games, which hits a little harder considering he used to be a professional baseball player himself. Autumn, on the other hand, is dealing with loneliness and lingering feelings for the sheriff, while also trying to navigate a messy situation with her ex-boyfriend. Those details are there, and you can sympathize with them to some degree, but if I'm being honest, I didn't feel particularly invested in either of them. I found myself kind of glossing over their stories. Still, I'll give the film credit for at least attempting to flesh them out. There are other characters in the film too, but even with the secondary cast, I just didn't care at all much about any of them. The relationship between the sheriff and his estranged daughter, who shows up as a cryptozoologist working for a government organization, had potential, but it felt a little forced to me. I'm not sure if it was due to the writing, the performance, or just how suddenly the storyline developed, but it never really clicked the way it probably should have. Outside the characters, the visuals and overall tone of the film are generally fine, but there are certain scenes where the actions of the characters clash with the tone the movie seems to be going for. There's one particular altercation between the sheriff and the deputy that comes completely out of left field. It felt awkward and almost unintentionally funny, which is strange considering the rest of the film tries to play things fairly serious. And then there's the Bigfoot himself. By the time the creature finally appears, the moment feels very random and honestly a bit underwhelming. The suit design isn't great and ends up looking almost parody-like at times. I genuinely couldn't tell if I was supposed to feel scared, excited, or laugh a little. What's even stranger is that you almost forget the movie's supposed to be about Bigfoot in the first place. The creature is treated more like an afterthought than the central focus of the film. When it finally shows up, it's brief enough that you're basically done with the character almost as soon as you see it. For a movie that markets itself as a Bigfoot film, it really doesn't have much Bigfoot in it, and that's honestly pretty disappointing. As for the music, there's really not much to say. It's not bad, but it's also not memorable in any way. It's just kind of there in the background doing its job and nothing more. Another issue I sort of had is the running time. The film runs a little over 2 hours, and it really didn't need to be that long. There's definitely enough material here that could have been trimmed down to something closer to 90 to 115 minutes, perhaps. A few scenes and even a couple of characters could have easily been cut out without hurting the overall story. Now, to give credit where credit's due, the film isn't completely without positives. Some of the staging and choreography are decent, and while the acting isn't anything spectacular, it's not terrible either. It mostly falls into that middle ground of being just fine, okay. The tone works in parts as well, though certain scenes and some weaker performances, especially from the daughter character, occasionally pull you out of the experience. Ultimately, though, the biggest issue for me is that the movie focused far more on the human drama than on the creature itself. And that's a common problem in a lot of monster movies. You hear similar complaints from people talking about films and franchises like Godzilla or Friday the 13th. Fans want to see the monster. That's the whole reason they're watching in the first place. People don't usually show up for the side characters. They show up for the creature, the icon, the title character, and in this case, Bigfoot ends up taking a backseat for most of the film. Call that harsh if you want, but that's just how monster movies have always worked. When the creature becomes secondary to everything else, it can feel like the movie's missing the whole point. So the big question is this a bad film? Well, not necessarily. I'd say it lands somewhere in the realm of mediocre crime thriller with a cryptid twist. I've definitely seen far worse movies than this one, but it's not terrible by any means. But as a Bigfoot movie, it's pretty lacking. If you're looking for stronger Sasquatch films, I'd personally recommend checking out Primal Rage, Abominable, or Exists. In my opinion, these are much better examples of what a Bigfoot movie can be or should be. This one, on the other hand, sits a little lower on the tier list. Not because it's outright bad, but because it never fully commits to being the Bigfoot film it could have been. If you're looking for something to throw on while doing chores around the house or killing a couple hours, it'll probably do the job. But if you're specifically looking for a great Bigfoot movie, you might want to start with the ones I mentioned earlier. And with that said, that's really it for the review. Mr. K out.